Okay, so we all know that the pandemic has pushed back some of the gains that we have made over the years on gender equality. However, it has also indicated that the crisis of masculinity is very deep, and it has gone deeper, in fact, and one has to engage with men. It is also the crisis. I mean, during the pandemic, we all know how things have developed, and it is so. Therefore, there is an urgent need to also engage with men and bring them as allies to in achieving gender inequality. So, since we are coming from South Asia, in India, especially in last 2 decades, women's work rate participation has dwindled from 36% in 2002 to close to 18% in 2020. And similarly, I think in most of the South Asian countries, except Bangladesh, it's been in decline. And similarly, we see the trend of increased burden of unpaid care work. And also when it comes to education and livelihoods, again, gender norms and roles have become barrier. It needs to be addressed, and it is important that men become part of the solution. And I think feminist voices over the years have been advocating for engaging with men for equality, and the idea of this session is to primarily look at it and understand, number one, the importance of working with men and boys and men to achieve men with boys and to achieve gender equality, including structural inequalities that constrain boy and men's abilities to become connected, caring, and equitable allies. We're also looking at, through this session, and discuss the impact of equality on caregiving in household, on shifting household gender dynamics, and supporting women to join technology-based skill education and workforce. And at the end, we are also looking at some recommendations, the practitioners that are there for policymakers, practitioners, that how we can integrate technology in reaching out to youth, young men, and creating a larger space within our communities and society to achieve gender equal households. And we have got a wonderful panel comprising of practitioners and researchers and policy advocates to engage with some of these questions. And we have with us, you will see the screen where in chat box, Shikha, can you put on chat box the bios?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so sure. You will see the bios of our esteemed panelists here. So I'll start with introducing Lakshman. Lakshman is a co-director at the Global Secretariat of Men Engage Alliance. Lakshman has worked with and provided technical support to various human rights NGOs, UN agencies. He has worked extensively on gender equality and justice, child rights, and transforming masculinities, and work with boys and men in gender equality. So welcome, Lakshman, for this session. We look forward to engage with you. I am also happy to introduce Sohini Bhattacharya. She is CEO of Breakthrough India, and Sohini has years of experience working with the social sector, especially working on the programs related to women. She is very passionate about gender equality and culture change, institution building, and leadership. And she has worked both in India as well as elsewhere to work at a scale to prevent violence against women and girls. Welcome, Sohini. We have with us Satish Kumar Singh. He is a senior advisor with Center for Health and Social Justice. Satish is one of the founding members of a lot of networks in India as well as at the South Asia level, which is MASWA. Then there is a South Asian network to address masculinity called Sanam, and also part of Men Engage Global. He has 35 years of experience as a trainer on gender-related issues, looking at sexuality, gender-based violence, masculinity, men's involvement in care work. So welcome, Satish. We have I'm happy to introduce Tavishi Gupta. She is the Director of Research, Evaluation and Learning at Equimundo. And Tavishi has a lot of expertise looking at gender norms and perpetuating violence against women and children, creating inequitable homes and workplaces environment, and reinforcing intergenerational transmission of harmful gender identities of boys and men. So Tavishi has been a trained researcher and has been working with, has widely published her work. So welcome Tavishi for this session. I'm also happy to introduce Clara. She is a director of program at Equimundo. Clara is a gender specialist with more than 20 years of experience in social science research, program design and implementation, and evaluation of program to advance gender equality and prevent violence. Her work focuses on engaging men and boys to promote gender equality and prevent violence against women and girls. So welcome, Clara. We also have with us Rachel. Rachel works on high risk, high reward project that span violence to pleasure. She builds global multidisciplinary team to design and test life-changing, scalable solution for those affected by conflict and disaster. She most recently developed a program currently scaling in Uganda that resulted in a 27% reduction in frequency of intimate partner violence. So welcome, Rachel. We'll be happy to hear your experiences as well. So let's get started. Lakshman, so Lakshman, if I can come to you, as you have experience of working at different levels and work at Men Engage Alliance, which is at a global secretariat. So your experience, I want to draw to your experience and give us the global perspective on need to engage with men, and also touch upon the evolution of work on masculinity, especially how feminist organizations have and are looking at masculinities now. If you can come and share your experience.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Srinivas. And so it's such a with this esteemed panelist, and thank you all for joining today. So maybe I think where I would start is a quick history in terms of the evolution of the work, right? So one couple of things to set the stage. One is that the work boys and men actually was, and feminist leaders. So we build onto that heritage that our feminist leaders initiated and helped us realize that we as boys and men need to be looking at ourselves and on the sides of being problem to the side of solution. And that whenever we talk about violence against women or violence against children or violence, majority of the perpetrators disproportionately are men. So we are talking about men's violence as such, right? And that's what needs to end. And that's the politics. So that is one. And hence there is a importance of looking and understanding accountability towards the feminist movement from the get-go of this work. And hence also the importance of integration of intersectional feminist approaches in the work that we do with men and boys. So in terms of the evolution, there are kind of four interconnected domains that we see at the moment in this field. One is the academic domain, So with late 50s, where in the Western world, there was a big understanding of the evolution of or initiation of academic domain, where there were studies developed in the 1950s in some Nordic countries, and then early 70s in North America as men's studies. So that was initiated, and few of the universities in Global South also initiated that. And with that also have led to new organizations set up, which are focusing on more research arena that has been set up for the last 1.5 decades. So a number of organizations have emerged. And as a result, there are more tools materials and resources which inform current activism, programs, and advocacy effort on men and masculinities in women's rights, SRHR, gender justice, or LGBTIQ, as well as a more of for interdisciplinary research and practitioners, right? And the second domain is the programming. As a result, building on to the legacy that was initiated by women's rights movement, particularly actually it started becoming more prominent after the ICPD in 1994, followed by the Beijing in 1995, which really brought us or brought more attention towards the importance of the work that men need to take a role in dismantling patriarchy. And that was a call in 1995 in specific in Beijing Platform for Action. That since then, some of the men who are, thinking about started becoming more serious and involved in this area. And that has resulted into various efforts, taking concrete steps in terms of programs, projects, campaigns, advocacy efforts, and so on. So with that, also for the last 2 decades now, we have got some level of evidence, and which you will also hear from Taveshi after this as well, is kind of evidences are emerging on the importance of the work and how component, right? It's no more why anymore. It is how is this work being done is the major content or the major part of the politics, but also the engaging boys and men or working with boys and men is not the end goal on in itself. That needs to be very, very clear from the beginning. So it's not about how many men are on the street, but what exactly those men on the street are doing to transform the system, the patriarchy from which we as men are benefiting in a structural way, right? There could be differences of understanding or interpretation at interpersonal or gender as relational concept versus gender as structural, right? So it's really important from a feminist point of view to look at gender as structural element, so that whenever majority of the programs seen in the field are more gearing towards the behavior change model. And yes, that is important to start with, but I think those behavior change model need to move into the spaces of dismantling system. That's where the intersectional feminist systems change agenda comes in. And that's where I think the latest discourse on the work with boys and men is more and more heading towards to make it more in the sense also to challenge the gender binary understanding or the notion or interpretation that generally comes forward. So again, to be aware that work with boys and men is not to reinforce the gender binary understanding of men versus women, but to really dismantle the essence of how gender is being defined. And again, sometimes it feels like, we are talking about engaging men, but men as an identity, but not an ideology, right? So masculinities as an institutional framework of ideological institutional mechanism that builds on and reinforces the binary understanding. And without challenging that, this work wouldn't involve. And that's the third strand that is coming up, or rather third strand that we see now, the importance of integration in a meaningful and accountable way, the intersectional feminist approach. The fourth strand is the policy strand. And we are now more and more observing and seeing a number of policies have been developed at international level as well, both at CSW, Human Rights Council level, but also at the regional level, at the country level, in the area of violence prevention particularly, but also more and more around sexual and reproductive health and rights, women, peace and security agenda, around caregiving, and so on, right? And lately around the LGBTIQ, which is again to do with challenging gender binary. So that is the kind of landscape we are in right now. But I wanted to conclude with Srinivas, where you started with, is more and more that we feel we are evolving. I'm returning exactly right now from CSW in Newark. We are regressing, unfortunately. So what we observe in the state is more and more restrictions of civil society in the human rights spaces, the lack of proper reflection of the politics of this work, and men and boys being highlighted in a very superficial way without meaningful integration of the language. The language in CSW right now is being watered down so much that it feels like the language way back in 2004 in CSW, which was on the work with boys and men, the language back then was way better than what we see now. So I think there is a bigger question of us as activists need to be a little bold and come together in a stronger collaborative way, keeping our differences. Yeah, we have differences in mind, but stand against the backlash or the rise of the right-wing groups who are becoming more influential in these spaces and negotiations, that we reclaim the space as feminist activists and come together in a bit more stronger way. And that's where the role of those working with boys and men comes in, is that these backlash and pushbacks are so much interrelated to the work around transforming masculinities and challenging authoritarian regime, authoritarian modality, influences of men in positions of power in these conversations and negotiations, and the role that men and boys have to step up in our own politics. So that's the broader landscape. I'll stop for now, and over to you, Srinivas.
Yes, so thank you, Lakshman. I think what you said, the desire to have power and influence, and as you said, the regression that we have seen in recent years is alarming. So that brings me to Tavishi. I want to engage with you. As we all know, Equimundo has a lot of experience of working with boys and men, and that too in different parts of the world. Can you also elaborate on both importance of engaging with men and boys from the lens of intersectionality, as well as the feminist framework? Why it is important to engage with men and boys? And if you can, share your experience as part of Promundo, and also share some evidences that you have in the same.
Absolutely. Thank you, Srinivas. And so wonderful to be part of this incredibly exciting, important panel. Yes, as Srinivas mentioned, so at Equimundo Center for Masculinities and Social Justice, we were formerly known as Promundo US. We have done, a lot of work, particularly kind of data gathering work on engaging boys and men across the world. We've been very fortunate and lucky in the partnerships that we've been able to build with organizations globally. And so a big part of what I'm going to do is, Lakshman, you kind of were alluding to this as sort of also looking at sort of gender, not just boys and men. And the data that we have collected is, of course, with men, but also with women. But a lot of the questions that we ask are often in the context of their, men in relationship to women, women in relationship to men. So looking at gender as a very relational kind of construct. So if I could have Shikha share the slides, I'm going to present.
Just give me a second.
Sure. From the beginning, please.
Just a second.
Sure. I'm going to be presenting on this kind of over a decade long endeavor that has taken place between Equimundo, initially began with ICRW, and then many other partners on using the images study, the International Men and Gender Equality Survey. And this is a particularly incredibly fascinating survey because it collects data not only on men's reports of perpetration of violence, but also men's gender attitudes, men's recollection of what their childhood was like, men and women's current state of decision-making in their household. So it's like really a wonderful array of data. And it really frames this question initially of like, why should we engage boys and men, but also looking at it from a very let's look at gender, not just men alone as Lakshman, you call them as entities, which I fully agree with. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what I'm going to present the data is going to be using a sample of 67,000 respondents across 32 countries. And as you can see in the timeline, as I mentioned, the data, the last kind of round of data was in 2022, but this data dates back to 2011, so a little bit over 10 years. Of course, this is not all the countries in which images has taken place. These are just the countries in which we were able to harmonize the data to be able to analyze it for this particular report. But many other countries, particularly conflict-affected countries like DRC, etc., that is something that's on our agenda to continue and harmonize that data to bring that into the conversation as well. So this timeline essentially just shows you where the survey was applied in which year. Can we go to the next slide? So just a quick snapshot of who are these participants, basically. There are about 50,000 men, 50,373 men from 32 countries and about 17,000 women from 21 countries. We did not interview women in every single country, and they were all interviewed face-to-face. The figure shows basically the samples of how men and women are distributed by age. So we do have some in the 18 to 24 years, all the way to 50 plus. Education, employment status. What you see over here, of course, are that the age distributions are comparable with slightly fewer women in the 18 to 24 categories and the 35 to 49 categories, and then more women in the oldest age group. With regard to education, men are more in the primary and the lower upper secondary categories, and women are more sort of in the below primary and post-secondary categories. And at the time of the sample, in terms of employment, 73% of men reported that they were currently employed, and that was the opposite for women. Only 3/4 said that they are not currently employed. We did try to ensure that the samples were representative of their specific geographic areas where they were being carried out. And they represented at least 2 urban areas. Of course, budgetary limitations do mean that not all images achieved the national representatives with which we would have liked to do the study. So anyways, but we've practiced kind of like, best practice household sampling approaches and ensured that the data was robust and was as strong as it could be. So let me delve into the findings. Could we go to the next slide, please? So the first kind of big key takeaway is that at its heart, what we need to understand is gender is about power, and the images data shows us how power and control are both contested and wielded, right? And so what we're seeing is how power is manifested in daily life. Could you go to the next slide? And so right off the bat, this is a very difficult graphic to kind of understand, but if you look at the report, you'll be able to see it more clearly. The highest form of wielding power in day-to-day life is violence. And so what we see across the 6 regions is that essentially for men and women, everywhere, intimate partner violence is documented at high levels across all 6 regions. What we saw was different kinds of violence: psychological, which is in blue, physical in red, and sexual violence in orange. And when all the kinds of violence are taken together, they're in the yellow triangles. I know it's very small on the slides, so I apologize for that. Essentially, what we see is that, for example, sexual violence is systematically the least reported form of violence by men. So just a reminder, these are men's reports of their perpetration of violence. Yes, I'm happy to send the report slide via Shikha to the participants after the talk.
It would be a good idea, I think, to share with all. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the gap between women's kind of greatest reports of this form of violence is particularly large in Tanzania, Uganda, Morocco, and Egypt, right? So women are reporting much higher sexual violence experiences than men report the perpetration of violence, right? And so the recognition, of course, that not only is that, we're already seeing high levels of violence being reported, but we know that men's reports of perpetration are indeed underreported. Yet what is very kind of important to see at this global scale is how power is kind of enacted upon on a daily basis and daily household level. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And this is a particularly interesting one as well. This is, what does decision-making look like for men and women in their current household over large financial investments? And so what we see, these are men's reports. Essentially, they report whether decision-making is predominantly male-dominated. So that's sort of the blue. Is it shared equally? That's the red. And is it kind of predominantly female-dominated? And that's yellow. And that can include female relatives, grandparents, older people, etc., parents. And what we see, of course, we see regional differences, but for a large part, we do see, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, we see a lot of blue and very little yellow. And across all regions, we see very little yellow. So what we're seeing is on a daily basis, it is women-led decision-making at household, particularly for large financial investments, is very, very little. Next slide, please. So another big kind of key takeaway is that, what we saw was how kind of enduring and harmful kind of inequitable attitudes about gender and masculinity continue to persist in people's kind of day-to-day basis, right? So if you show the next slide, just to let you know, we studied like power. So the item is a man should have the final word about decisions in his home. Roles, a woman's most important role is to take care of her home and cook for the family. And violence, a woman should tolerate violence in order to keep the family together. And the bigger the triangles, the more the agreement with power, roles, and violence. And again, we see, right, for essentially, if you see in the Arab states and Asia Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia, the triangles are much bigger, indicating that men's agreement with these three gender attitudes is very, very high. Next slide, because that's a very interesting one. And when we sort of see that across age, a really interesting finding emerges. And my colleague Clara Aleman will discuss sort of why this becomes important in the next sort of set of sections topic. Essentially, when we kind of see the attitudes over age. Now, the general kind of belief and understanding is, oh, the younger kind of, young men probably hold more gender equitable attitudes versus older men who tend to hold more gender inequitable attitudes. But our images data actually shows sort of an inverted U shape. So what we see is that the men who are in the youngest kind of, age groups, the 18 to 24 essentially, are holding as inequitable attitudes as the men in the 50 plus, 45 plus age. And it's the men in the middle, right, the 35 to 49, that tend to hold the more gender equitable attitudes. Again, nobody's saying they're gender equitable. I'm just saying more in comparison to the other age groups. And this becomes a really critical entry point for us to think about, because again, like I said, the general kind of belief is that, hey, younger men should have more gender equitable attitudes. Next slide, please.
More milk. No, I don't think so. We've got yogurts. I don't know whether you want any.
Lovely, thank you. And when we link these attitudes to men's kind of, own mental health, right? And sort of what we see is, and this is like fantastic because again, we're talking about gender, not just men themselves, is if you see the blue lines, the more restrictive your attitudes, the worse your mental health outcomes, whether it's in depression or suicidal thoughts in the past month. And the next slide shows, if you can go to the next slide, binge drinking and not seeking sort of health support. So the more restrictive your attitudes, by and large, of course, there's country variations, but at global kind of trend level, by and large, the more restrictive your attitudes, the poorer the outcomes for men themselves. In the interest of time, maybe Shikha, could you skip to one extra slide, please? The next one. Thank you. In the interest of time, I also want to say that what we have a big takeaway from the images work is that basically attitudes and behavior there's like a confirmation, right, of what we know, that attitudes and behavior translate into respondents' own gender lives based on what they have seen while they were growing up. So there's an intergenerational cycle of sort of, gender equality or inequality being passed down. So the next slide shows, for example, what happens when you have basically fathers who themselves were very involved in like taking care of the children, household tasks, and if you have a mother who works outside the home. So the 4 quadrants basically say, all right, the leftmost and the topmost quadrant is the most gender inequitable. The father was not involved in daily household tasks, cleaning the house, prepping the food, taking care of the children, and the mother didn't work outside the home. And what we see is the lowest kind of, attitude scale, the attitude on power, roles, and violence. And the bottom right quadrant, right, where the father is very involved and the mother worked outside the home, had the highest attitude scale, right? So which is the most gender equitable. So this is men's reports basically on a scale of 1 to 4. So it's not very gender equitable. It's still 2 is not indicating highly gender equitable. But when we see that, again, the more the father was involved and the more the mother worked outside the home, the more equitable their attitudes could be, right? So again, a long way to go, 100% agreed on that, but yeah, we can keep discussing that. Next slide, please, really quick. I know I'm running out of time. And then one of the most kind of strongest links that we see across all violence, against women violence prevention research is that the links between witnessing violence as a child and perpetrating IPV as an adult is, if you see the blue lines, the blue bars, in every single country where we had this data, for those men who reported having witnessed some kind of violence against their own female guardian mother as a child, they had a much higher likelihood of perpetrating IPV, any form of IPV as an adult. And so again, thinking about, right, the kind of the cycle of violence as it never kind of ends until and unless we intervene. So the recognition of not just sort of why it's important, but also kind of beginning to touch upon what Lakshman was saying. How do we do this? What do we do? What are the entry points? And so I have more slides, but I will stop here in the interest of time. Happy to share this report with others. If we can go to the last slide, I just want to thank sort of the country partners, the field workers, the authors, the funders, the data assist who helped us harmonize the data, of course, ICRW and many more as a thank you. This is work that has been going on for over a decade and a half almost. And so just want to ensure that the credit goes to everybody. Thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Yeah, so
Srinivas, back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tavishi. I think the images are very powerful, but at the same time, as you say, that there's a long way to go. That also brings me to the question. So one has to engage with boys and men, but the question comes, what is the entry point? How do you enter? So that I think that question I want to bring it to all the practitioners.
Avoid
Sohini, Satish, Clara, Rachel, please do come and share your insight. Give us a short insight into the entry points of work with boys and men on reducing structural inequalities and how do we engage, and some of the good practices or learnings that you can think of. Yeah, we will of course dwell in detail when we come to the next session or the concrete experiences. But just to begin with, kindly please share the entry points that, what's your experience, what's the insight you have. We can start with Satish if you want to come first, and then Clara, Rachel,
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lakshman. So when we are going to work with men and boys and particularly want to engage boys, so the first question comes from boys, particularly from boys, that what they will gain. And this is very right question, because why they are going to join such types of vision, travel, images, that where they are going to lose their privileges, which they are enjoying. So that is the one question, and we find that it is easy to help them to come together and not discuss start with their vulnerabilities, but certainly start what is hindering factors, why they are not going to share or feel easy to share on their vulnerabilities. So it means bring them first to sharing at some level, then also need to help them to analyze their power in the family and the privilege in the family and surrounding them, whether they are in the education system, in the playground. So what are their privileges, how they are acquired the spaces which is available for both boys and girls. The other is, we think the discussing on the empathy, and everybody is sitting in the relationship. So it is easy to help them empathize that what happened with their mother, with their sister, when boys and men enjoy their own power and privileges. And we can't say in sociology, we can't guarantee that everything work, but there's a diverse people. So what will click with them, we don't know. So we have to collect the lots of story, and these story help other also. So people can see if their small changes help their family, their sister, their own life, it can be adopted by the other. And in this way, we are also pushing them as a role model. So that is other thing, we have to create some role model, because there is no role model. They see every time in media about to show their manhood, there is some role model. But the person who is very much sharing, loving, caring, helping nature, and listening everyone, this is not very much acknowledged, celebrated, felicitated. So at their level also. So that means we have to establish some other role model, which is other types of men, and then what they gain. So we found that in our Maharashtra work, Jharkhand and Rajasthan, and other recent work in Delhi with youth, then when they realize once that their own role is going to create or restrict the women, create the obstacle for their sisters or their mothers to achieve their entitlements, to access their rights. When they realize this, then there is a two options they found. That one is they stop themselves being a obstacles. Other is they can take the other path also to move forward to helping them to remove the obstacles. So I found in one workshop that one boy who was studying in 12th, he was very problematic. He questioning so many things and try to help this, try to establish their manhood and not ready to listen the things. But after 5 days, he was sometimes he thought that he was crying also. And the change we found that when he gone back home, he took his sister to Azad office to enroll her as a driver. So the person who was very problematic, person was the first person after the workshop who took her sister for non-traditional livelihood skill. So shift is possible, and we found that then we tried to understand ourselves also. What was the triggering point?
I
That
think
means we have,
if I can, we will definitely, as I said in the next segment, we will
Sure.
dwell on more of your experience. I think I want to also go to both Sohini and Clara as well as Rachel to also share their own experience and insight as to what is the entry point and how they look at the shift. Possibly shift can happen. So Sohini, you want to come in, and then the Rachel and Clara. Yeah.
Thank you, Srinivas and Tavishi. That was fantastic to see all those data. I work with Breakthrough, an organization that has been working for the last 23 years on shifting gender norms to train and build the leadership of young people to say no to gender-based violence. I'll just take a few minutes to say how we started working with men and boys was in 2008, 2007 and 8, we used to run big campaigns. And we had and the campaign was pretty much, showing men as perpetrators, empowering women, a very us versus them kind of a narrative. We took it to women in very rural areas, and we started talking to them. And they said, don't talk to us, go and talk to the men. And that's how we started working on a campaign that kind of, went viral in 2008. The campaign was called Bell Bajao or Ring the Bell. It asked men and boys to stand up and take a simple action by stopping, domestic violence by ringing a bell. It was, the campaign worked because it had a very simple message. All you had to do is just ring the bell, and it talked to a completely different audience. In 2008, not too many people were talking to men and boys about gender-based violence. So, totally unlikely partners, very simple messages, worked like fire. It was, copied in about 9 countries, including China and USA. Taking, bell bajao or ring the bell became a metaphor for taking action worldwide. And we saw that because of the campaign, that domestic violence can be a community concern went up to about 49%. And that kind of set us forever on a path of looking at men, not just as problems, but also as solutions. And that's the way we actually entered the road of working with men and boys. When we were kind of, doing the end line of this campaign, we actually saw that young people are the ones that we should be working with, because then it is you have the ability to actually build a generational shift, a mindset change of an entire generation around gender equality. So we started actually working with young people. We created a gender equity curriculum called Taro Ki Toli or Gang of Stars that taught both girls and boys. And also here, just important to recognize that men and boys are not a homogeneous group, just as women and girls, and therefore developing interventions that reflect their diverse life experiences and contexts is critical. So our curriculum actually focused on negotiation skills, talking about difficult subjects, pushing intergender conversation, because in the schools in Haryana, which is a gender regressive state in India, where we worked, there is literally a wall between the boys and the girls section. And, talking between boys and girls was just not encouraged. It was seen as, bad by parents. So we actually started talking to young boys about things like sharing the burden of care work at home, thinking about encouraging sisters to have, a non-discriminatory life, encouraging their friends to stop sexual harassment on the way to school. Simple actions that young boys were really, really interested in having. There was a RCT done on this work, and we found that after 2.5 years of direct interventions, there were significant changes in both gender-based attitudes as well as behaviors, not just among girls, but also among boys. In fact, there was a large, change in boys than among girls. And that was also a reason, because society sanctions boys' behavior much clearly than it sanctions girls' behavior change. So the adolescent empowerment program that we started following this was actually looking to shape gender attitudes and behaviors at a stage when their views are still malleable and more progressive, and gender equitable thinking can be instilled. At the core of this was the gender equity curriculum that we worked with. Yeah. So what happens is that we work with about more than 700,000 adolescents and 3,000 young adults in very rural areas. And what we've seen is that men and boys form an integral part of our interventions as allies. By recognizing that harmful pressures of patriarchal norms on them, we are actually collectively working towards gender equality for all. Boys' perceptions about sharing housework has changed a lot. We see young boys, taking up stands on menstrual hygiene. We see boys, really advocating for mixed playing fields in their village areas. And we see boys standing up to send their female relatives to school or to work, or to really, supporting their decision to delay their age of marriage. it contributes to the holistic well-being of the adolescent boys and girls we work with. So it's the concept of equality actually is easy for young boys to catch on, as we are experiencing. 11 to 14, 15, 16-year-old boys are actually like the tagline of our work, which is Teri Jeet, Meri Jeet, which is your victory is my victory, implying that a sense of empathy, kindness, inclusion, and understanding for each individual without any discrimination is actually key for the success of each of them. So this model is actually running across 13 districts in 4 states of India, and the original 18,000 young boys and girls who were involved in our program early on in 2012-13, we're doing a longitudinal cohort study with them to see whether those norms that's changed when they were 12, 13, 14, are they still sticking? Are things changing? Are they still continuing to believe that, helping with housework is good, or to have a partner who goes out to work and is economically independent good? Things that they believe in when they're 12, 14, are they kind of still sticking now that they're 20, 21? I'll stop here and can talk a little bit more about our work in dismantling some of the infrastructure later on. And some of the key issues that we've identified through our research with young boys and girls. I'll share the link to our research here.
Sure. So I think it's very interesting what you said. I think also we all agree that early stages when the patriarchal notions and the pressure on masculinity sets in, one has to engage. Clara, I want to come to you, and also Rachel, whoever wants to come first, please also share your insight about your work and what is the entry point and how did you look at this and, got involved with this question.
Thank you so much, Srinivas. And yeah, like Lakshman and Tavishi were explaining, men and boys are absolutely critical, and Sohini as well, to advance gender equality and dismantling patriarchy. And boys and men, need gender equality too, because harmful notions of masculinity affect them. Baiba in the chat, I think, was saying, how do we get men to be part of these conversations and not see this as just a women's issue? Because as Tavishi was saying, this also affects their well-being, their health, their families, their relationships. These findings of images highlight some of the key dimensions of women and girls' lives where gender equality manifests and constrain their agency and opportunities, and how these patterns are learned by children since a very early age. So our work in Equimundo, through research and program experience with partners in dozens of countries, showed us, we've seen and measured how men's positive engagement can really make a difference in some of these dimensions of women's and girls' lives. So our entry points, we usually work with men and boys at critical transition times in their lives, early childhood, adolescence, and I won't zoom in there because Sohini, I think, did a brilliant explanation of why that's important and the type of work that's done, and also fatherhood. At these times in different ways, but men and boys are particularly receptive and interested in delving into issues around identity, sexuality, relationships, being a good father, right? So I'm going to now center on the work we do on fatherhood, which is quite prominent at a time when men are really interested in becoming good and close fathers to their children. Our program P, which is P for Pai in Portuguese, father in Spanish, creates safe spaces among fathers and their partners and provides concrete strategies for men to engage as active, equitable, and non-violent fathers through experiential activities, critical consciousness, and challenging these traditional gender norms or restrictive gender norms, and practicing or providing them with skills and forms of practicing new positive social behaviors related to their caregiving and a different way to being engaged, involved emotionally in their children's lives, as well as stepping up on the care and domestic work. Several evaluations, but particularly in those countries where our partners have been implementing this program for the longest, show a lasting reduction in the use of violence in the home, both by men against their female partners and against their children, a reduction in men's dominance in decision-making, an increase in men's time spent on uncare work, and everything we've been saying about why that's so important, and also improving couple relationships. As Tavishi mentioned also, this has an intergenerational positive effect because children that have witnessed their parents equitably doing and sharing household chores, working both paid and unpaid outside and inside the house, are more likely to repeat these behaviors in adulthood. And this sets in motion a virtuous cycle that can increase men's participation both in caregiving work, but also prevent the intergenerational transmission of violence. I won't center on our program for adolescents, similar to what Sohini described. It's called H&M for men, women. And its latest adaptation is called Many Ways of Being, to recognize and include youth and adolescents of all gender identities and engaging them in, again, promoting healthy sexual health, relationships, and violence prevention. So I wanted to mention that because you asked about the best practices and the challenges. And of course, we found that in these spaces, men and boys find an important space in which they can connect and express emotions that Satish was mentioning before. Boys have difficulty in that, like in connecting and expressing those emotions. That's not something they're encouraged to do since they're very young. So that's what works. Now, a recurrent challenge that we and our partners have faced in diverse settings in all regions has been the uptake and retainment, or let's say maintaining and meaningful engagement of men to come for 15 or 20 sessions and sit down for 2 hours, because we know lives are busy everywhere and there's the mandate of and the very structural determinant of having to provide. So particularly in urban settings, we find that with adult men or fathers, it's increasingly challenging to maintain their participation, and this has been exacerbated during the pandemic. So we have started adapting and exploring remote and hybrid ways of delivering these same, what we call gender transformative programs, and creating innovative resources to offer the same possibilities for critical reflection and learning and about dismantling restrictive gender norms in formats that fathers, men, individuals can use wherever they are, wherever they live or work. So meeting men where they are. We can speak more about that afterwards. The third, I wanted to mention, entry point is working with boys during their early years, let's say before the early adolescence, from 4 to 13, because as also Shahini was mentioning, unhealthy ideas about boyhood, and many in the chat are mentioning, unhealthy ideas about boyhood are reproduced generation to generation around the world by parents, both women and men, families, grandparents, schools, sports and community programs, and in media, of course. So we do need to start much earlier to support boys and the adults in their lives with the resources, the tools that they need to raise, teach, coach, and set an example for boys to become men who embrace healthy masculinity and gender equality. And so the Global Boyhood Initiative that we can also share with you entails a combination of school-based curricula, say in-person work that teachers can do with students, but also a digital platform with a ton of very practical resources that parents and adults interacting with children can use to promote these more gender equitable attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, and so that boys can become really the connected, empathetic individuals they can be, free of gender stereotypes. I'm going to stop for now.
Vaisal has just shared the link. I think it will be useful, I mean, to kind of collate all this and share.
Srinivas, I think you went on mute.
Got Okay, I was just saying that Vessel has just shared the link. I think it will be useful to collect all this knowledge stream and, share with all the participants and a wider distribution. So Rachel, if you have, I want to come to you, but if you have anything to add to what has been said, please do that.
Yeah, my background is my first job was in the private sector, and you can think of a lot of the private sector as figuring out how to sell you things you don't really need, or how to make you go to services that you might not know you need. But really, we're facing a similar thing here where we all want to solve a problem, but our user doesn't think that problem actually exists, right? And so a lot of what we need to do here is think about what our marketing is, right? And realize that men don't want to show up for programs that are going to tell them they're bad or they're wrong, that tell them that we want to transform them or change their thinking, right? These are not things that we in our daily lives sort of buy into. We all want self-improvement. We all want better relationships. We all want to reduce conflict. And so thinking about how we can put ourselves in the men's shoes and understand what value they'll get out of it, and be able to position not just how we talk about what we do, but the actual services we provide so that it resonates with the needs that they have, and also simultaneously is in very close alignment with what our goals are and what women's goals are. And it's absolutely possible, but it takes a lot of listening to people who frequently in our conversations and in our dialogues, we talk to as not allies, right? As adversaries. And that kind of positioning is not helpful to engage men, right? Some of the very tactical things that we've done when you get marketing right, when you get the language right, is we've been able to recruit thousands of men into digital programs through social media recruitment, right? This is men saying, yes, sign me up for that. Oh, you're going to reduce conflict in my relationship. You're going to improve my family life. Sign me up. I want to be a part of that. And that's both because of how we've positioned and created language that resonates with men, being able to test that language hundreds of times, on a social media platform, but then also create a program that's easy for them to say yes to. As Clara mentioned, it's not asking men to show up for 2 hours, 20 different times, week after week after week. It's a WhatsApp group that they can engage in very easily at their own time while they're at home. So they read the message and it gives them an example of something to try, a conversation to have, and they can do it. Another thing that's worked really well, I know a lot of us work in very religious countries, and one thing is to morally frame our message, right? So that this is not something that this NGO wants you to do or is offering, but yes, stewardship, right? That's a concept in the Genesis mandate, in the Bible. That's something that's important. You believe your pastor, right? You listen to that person. And so how do we engage with the moral and religious institutions to deliver these messages? Yeah, that's, I'll stop there.
Thank you. It's interesting what you have said. I think it's also how do you frame your question and how do you reach out where they do not feel that as if they are a target. So I want to just shift gear in terms of, you're also looking at the practical, what's happening around the work using, various tools to engage men, especially looking at, bringing them as allies for gender equality, step up the care work and shifting the household gender dynamics. So Satish, I want to come back to you, because a lot of work, as I shared also earlier, that particularly in India and South Asia, the burden of unpaid care work and dwindling women's work rate participation is a big problem. So if you can talk about the work that is being done both by Azad Foundation, CHSA, and many other organizations to kind of engage with boys and men, and how it is helping women to join market-based, tech-based, non-traditional livelihoods. If you can share in brief some of the experience. You were talking earlier about how the one boy who seemed to be a problematic has finally is actually helped bring his sister to enroll with Women with Wheels program. So just kindly share your thoughts and how it's being done.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Srinivas. So we have to, we can't say there's a one method or one thing. So all of us are practitioner and social scientists and trying out what is work. And with 30 people, 30 methodologies can be work we don't know. So we try to find out the trigger point also. So, but we have to create some atmosphere, some structure where can be the process can be started, and with the belief that the men and boys are also sitting with a very vulnerable situation sometimes, particularly in the context of masculinity and the new liberal capital masculinity at this time, where their role, gender perceived role, is either no relevant or challenged. So this is the context, and particularly in South Asia, it is and we can see the example from the COVID lockdown also, where the men have to think that one thing, they are a breadwinner. They thought they are breadwinner, and women also thought that men are breadwinner, which is now not true, not relevant. So there are many women are outside. So we have to create the safer space for boys, for men, where they come collectively and reflect collectively and develop some their, after the reflection, develop some their change plan. And after, when they are going to practice something different, then the obstacle they immediate face at the home. It means we have to work same time with the family also, because even the women, even the mother, even the sister create the obstacles because they have never seen the other role model also. Then certainly we need to create some capacity building, some skill building, some to change their perspective and followed with their change plan, and continuous reflection process need to be established collectively. At the same time, they need the mentoring support. When they face lots of challenges, they feel lonely in the family, with the peer, in the institution. So how we are helping to bring them to support each other at the time, emotional support, whether the intellectual support. So that support required men also. Without emotional support, men is not going to change, and maybe there is a huge difficult situation for them also. So, and then also how we create more mobilizer and take the issue at the broader level. Then we need the lots of story, whether the success story, whether the we can say challenge stories, but that story can be converted in a resource material using the technologies, using the social media, WhatsApp, Instagram thing. And when we have to create the environment also, that we can say the enabling environment. So one times we have to, like classroom model, where people are coming continuously, sitting 2 times, 3 times in a month, and reflecting, helping each other to understand, and then practicing in the family. But at the same time, we have to take the in community also. It means we have to create the atmosphere in the community, in the family, in the institution also. So what we are discussing in the gender equality, and if it's not going to discuss in the school, and when they take the different message from the school, then huge problem also. The other thing youth love, found in Assam also, young boys love the are not very much encouraged in sitting in a classroom and taking and listening the lecture. But if they want always to outside of using the game, using the activity, so it means we have to build some activities also, creative activities through the game in the public places. So sometimes, like when we use the campaign, and in campaign or gender mela and organizing some types of competition and challenging the traditional competition also, which is the only for the men or some for the women that need to be challenged. And so these types of things which come in the community, and we use the same notion of the, what you can say, the slogan, which the personal is the political, we have taken from the feminist movement, that is also adopted for the boys and men also. So what they are doing, there are many men, many boys have the different role. They're playing the different role, but the behind the curtain. So there is need to remove the curtain and take this in a public places, so people can, so we can help to establish new gender equitable norm. It means our work is not only change the individual and how many boys is changed, but also to understand why boys is going to be changed, what are the enabling environment, and how this enabling environment can be ensured through the campaign, through the collective network, with the peers, with the similar thinkers, and continuous mentoring support using through social media. So I'm stopping here. So let's start later. You are mute.
Srinivas sir, you're on mute.
Yeah, so Sohini, if I can ask you, so Breakthrough has done some amazing work on behavioral change communication with, as you said, your work with young boys and men. So I just wanted to understand from you, first, what has been the experience at the ground level? I mean, also, I also wanted to ask if these engagements are helping in shifting household gender dynamics towards equality. And also, just very briefly, if you can touch upon what can be done to sharpen our message, especially communication, when we engage with young boys and men.
So thank you, Srinivas. And so we have, we've developed a adolescent communications package along with a gender equity curriculum. And this communication package actually creates two mascots, Pinky and Pankaj, a regular 15-year-old boy and girl. And I'm talking within the binaries here. So boy and girl in an Indian rural situation. So things that we find difficult to bring up with boys or bring up with families or bring up with, in communities are actually things that Pinky and Pankaj bring up. I wish, I had actually thought of sharing one of those videos with our audience here, but I've shared some of the links to those videos. So there is Pinky and Pankaj, to show that friendship, just pure friendship and on an equal level is possible between a boy and a girl. And that you can actually look at how boys and girls together can actually talk about sharing the household chores, sharing the care work at home across, genders. We found these kind of small videos and audio messages very interesting and very useful to share with our communities in public. What works? It works if you show the local context, if you show what the realities in that village or in that area is. It's great if you can do it in local language, because that's what works. If you keep the message very simple, you do not have to go into any kind of jargon or talk about masculine hegemony, or you talk about toxic masculinity. You have to talk in very simple languages that can be understood across communities. And you have to have an ask. What is the ask at the end? The ask at the end is to families, to actually parents, saying, can you let your boys, your son share the care work that your daughter has at home? Just simple, asks which actually resonate with people. We find that with these kind of messages and this kind of communication, the uptake for sharing the care work at home goes up a lot. The other communication that we have done is actually always involving men and boys in the conversations on the kind of problems that women and girls are facing. So one of our videos and one of our communication campaigns that did really well is called Share Your Story, where we asked mothers to share their stories of sexual harassment that they have faced with their young sons. Because, when we were working in communities, when we spoke to young boys about sexual harassment, they said, it's just good time pass for us. It's an entertainment for us. We didn't think this is going to actually, create any problem in the lives of, girls in our village. So when you bring these two communities together and they sit face to face and talk about these things, you get the nuances out of that. So that campaign actually went to 101.5 million viewers just organically. We didn't have any money to spend on that. But because of the simple messages, the messages: share your sexual harassment story with your son, involve the son in understanding the gender norms that is actually, getting, addressed in that whole thing. So those are two of the things from our communication language. The other thing that we have actually understood, and which is what we are right now working on, is this whole pressure that boys feel to conform to and to perform, this whole hegemonic masculinity, that poses a significant barrier. And because it's rooted in our culture, our OTT and our mainstream films are constantly showing this hyped up super, masculinity. So we are actually right now engaged in some research and some, conversations with mainstream OTT, creators and filmmakers and writers and directors to see whether creating an alternative, alternative masculinity, or having more, more kind of softer roles for men, does that work? Does that work for them in terms of their business? And we know that it will work very well with our communities back there. And the answer is very easy. The answer is, if you have more women in the producer's room, on the writer's table, in the director's room, things automatically change. We conducted a series of conversation with 5 filmmakers, and another 5, is in the offing. And we had some amazing insights from them in this same kind of thing. So that's another thing, because so much of the adoption of attitudes, norms, and behaviors come from your deep-rooted culture. And a low engagement in any kind of gender programs can actually show the reluctance and detachment that young boys have in adopting an alternative kind of behavior, an allyship, a more gentle masculinity, rather than what we are used to seeing. So I'll stop here.
Sure.
And sorry, I had one question that Jyoti actually asked. I don't know whether I want to take it, whether I can.
We'll come back to this question, because we are also taking notes of some of the questions that have come.
Thanks.
So I just want to address this both to Clara and Rachel, because a lot of work is with youth. And as we have seen, technology plays a very important role both in engaging and, as you said also, Rachel, it's about also marketing, how you place your communication using new tools to engage young minds. So if you can share in brief your own experience, you can come, Rachel first, and Clara, you can come later. Whoever wants to come first, but just in brief, if you can explain or at least bring your thoughts about how does this work, engaging with technology, but also looking at the change, especially in terms of attitude, in terms of looking at care work and reducing violence.
Yeah, thanks. So the elephant always in these rooms is scale, right? And technology is really, whether it's recruitment, whether it's retainment, whether it's monitoring, it is always going to make our costs lower and improve our ability to scale. So I think across the board. The trade-off, of course, is that you're going to have less impact, right? You cannot transform everyone at scale, right? That's not going to be possible. You're just not going to have the desire there necessarily, and there's not going to be the money there. And so I think it's something that we all need to, as you think about technology, that is the thing that needs to be sort of second in your mind, is what are the risks or changes we're willing to accept by increasing our scale and reach, and possibly reducing our impact, or as was said earlier, just shifting it to a simple behavior we ask someone to have, a simple conversation. And so being really tactical about those changes that we're willing to make as we try to achieve scale. So technology is going to be the way that we're able to do that and reach more people. Now, another thing to think about is that online spaces aren't the same as in-person spaces, right? So on this call, folks are going to be cooking dinner, they're going to be writing emails, they're here and they're partially listening, most of us, I hope. But it's a different kind of engagement. It's a different way to measure engagement and behavior and interaction. One of the fascinating things about working with men in online spaces is lurking behavior, right? So many men are lurkers in online spaces, but that doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. Now, in a workshop setting, if someone was in the corner on their phone answering emails, you'd say, that person's not paying attention, they might as well not be here, you can leave now. But that's absolutely not the case in a digital space where content is sort of evergreen, it stays there, they can re-reference it. And so I think it's also about sort of shifting our paradigm for how we think about engagement and, transformation, and really understanding what online spaces can be for men who, we live in an attention economy, right? We're not gonna be able to get 100% of people's attention for a good portion of their week or their month, or even a small portion of it. And so how do you start to leverage the attention you can get and build spaces that allow men to show up in a way that they're comfortable with, and then infuse those spaces with the ability to learn from each other. And as was said, with really practical things that are immediately rewarding and beneficial to men and can be applied over and over and referenced again. And, as was shared with the amazing statistic of, messaging being shared with millions of people is shareable, is something that they can then take sort of ownership of and share with other people. Clara, we've been exploring this in Colombia together, recently worked on a project with the Inter-American Development Bank in Peru, also creating digital spaces for men. So this is something that, I think it's a really exciting area that people are engaging in and asking questions about that are absolutely not without challenges, but it's really a pleasure to work with organizations that are willing to sort of take a risk and try out different models and modalities for engaging men. Over to you, Clara.
So just providing a bit more of nuance for many who might be asking, but how do you do this online, right? How do you reproduce those important connections, that critical reflection, and also linking with some of the things that Rachel said. First is this important thing of addressing men's priorities and concerns, right? So for example, in this program, we are working together in Colombia, and we've done something similar in Cambodia as well. Men's priority and challenge is to spend quality time with their kids. They really want to be close emotionally. They want to be like the friends of their kids, but don't know how or don't find the space. Or so what we've tried to do with this adaptation of our fatherhood program in a hybrid modality is really do that, is engage them through a WhatsApp group, like Rachel was saying, through weekly engagements, which are very, let's say, have a human face, have a human facilitator in a dialogue. It's not just pushing, it's not a chatbot pushing content or press 1, 2, 3. It's a very detailed script that has a flow that invites them daily or actually twice a week during a sustained period to reflect, to share, to try things at home, to share things with their partner, with their kids. And in the first mini pilot we've done, men have really loved this. And at the beginning, maybe some were apprehensive to share about their personal lives, but immediately when they saw others doing it, they were like just flooding, the space with pictures of their families, with their aspirations for how they could build caring, equitable, nonviolent relationships. And so while we are now working with our NGO partners, CINDE in Colombia, our vision is really to create a national solution. We are working also with public child protection provider of parenting services. So the idea is that this can advance the country's commitment with increasing gender equality through engaging men in caregiving and also promoting early childhood development that is cost effective and impactful at scale. The truth is that we are in a process. We cannot tell you this works, it's effective, we will achieve all of this impact, but I think there's tremendous potential in it. I wanted to mention one more thing, because Lakshman at the beginning was talking a lot about the importance of not just kind of relying on individuals to kind of take the load of this, of dismantling a whole patriarchal structure and the structural determinants of it. We know that social change and shifts in restrictive norms won't happen just by asking every father that can come to a group to change his own behavior, although a lot can happen. We also need to address, again, the environment, the policies, the structural constraint. So I wanted to also share another initiative that is leveraging the power of technology and digital platforms, which is MenCare. MenCare is a complement and it's a global fatherhood campaign that is part of, that complements the fatherhood program I was talking about. It's active in more than 60 countries on 5 continents and is also seeking to promote men's involvement as equitable fathers to achieve family well-being, gender equality, and support women's social and economic empowerment by primarily taking up more childcare and domestic work. And we do work with not only individuals, but institutions, both private and public policymakers. And right now, what we are asking and inviting private and public sector, large institutions to do with the aim of transforming the culture and the policies that are needed for men to take up more of this unpaid care work in the workplace is to sign up to what we've called the 50-50 commitment for employers. And this aims, again, to reduce the unpaid care done by women. And so firms, enterprises, public sector institutions that sign up to this challenge sign because they either have tangible plans to show or plan to have progress on at least some of very important policies, such as equal paid non-transferable parental leave or family-friendly workplace policies or others. So those that sign the commitment are visible through a digital space, and we already are seeing a lot of interest, and this resonates with a lot of public and private sector institutions. So it's a completely different example of how can technology be leveraged to really have a social impact that goes beyond the individuals or the couples that can be part of a gender transformative intervention.
Right. Thank you, Clara. I just want to move to a kind of a segment where we want to talk about, if all of you, I want to engage with everyone. Lakshman, maybe starting with you. What are a couple of recommendations, looking at the progress we have made and looking at the scenario, as you have also mentioned earlier, that there are also regressions that have happened. So what are a couple of recommendations that you have for both policymakers and practitioners as to how do we go about in future, especially engaging boy and men, looking at now, spaces are more digital and there are various ways that are possible now because of technology with AI coming in and 5G and, the way communication networks are improving. How do we go about it? How do we engage policymakers? How do we I want to, start with you, and then of course, everybody please join in and give 1 or 2 recommendations that would be useful for practitioners, policymakers, and for the civil society as well. And then we will open up for the questions.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. That was really great on where we are heading. But I think I would like to be a little more provocative here, in the sense that I shared some resources as well, and what we are from a broad analytical perspective on the work that we have been doing for over around 2 decades now. what we are observing is are some of these, and I would like to make it a little more provocative in that sense as well. Is one is the majority of the work with boys and men we have found being stuck with those that somehow revolve around the easy things for men, right? Not very, but they are cherished for doing something very smaller. And that is not moving to the kind of systems transformation that is supposed to be moving towards. So it is getting stuck issues like, in terms of which are not really shifting the needle in terms of systems transformation. So, and then other thing is that is now coming up is we talked about the entry points, and all of these entry points are amazing and they have proven to be a very great entry points. But we sometime now that we have to move beyond these entry points to the broader and much more uncomfortable topics as well. So we have taken so much of time to understand what are the problems, but also to look at the other side of the research that we have probably not looked into is not all boys and men go with gender unequal attitudes. We have been looking and doing research on the problem side, right? Another thing that, sometimes back that Satish and we used to talk about is we haven't done enough job to research on among those who may reject some of these unequal behaviors because of their socialization even, right? Some of us do come from families where our parents used to be violent, but some of men may not even accept those behaviors and have rejected. So how do we bring that positive aspects as well to the fore so that we don't get stuck on the problems, but we look at and bring more positive sides to probably this is what may inform some of our programs. That's one. That's second. The third is to talk about, men and boys need to be cherished or facilitated for the work they do. Felicitated for the work they do is a bit problematic. I think in the sense that now there are more and more kind of gender champions model coming up, which is hugely problematic. And I think we should not be cherishing men and boys for doing very minute things, for just standing up and saying I'm a gender champion in public and saying I'm a feminist, but really not pushing the needle, right? I think we have to be a little more crucial and more critical of this approach in the field. And what we have realized is that these kind of approaches are reinforcing men or putting men into pedestal and reinforcing men again and bringing men again into the center of the picture, for which feminist leaders have been trying to get into that space more, never got into, but men even just for saying, forget about doing, are cherished and clapped for saying that, right? So that's another thing. The last point is also around the men's vulnerability conversation. So if you look at the histories of where I'm now coming back to Backlash, where the men's rights groups started, some of the men who started doing this work were part of initially, if you look at the Northern American history, were part of the feminist movement. When they talk about men's vulnerability and that patriarchy has negative impact on the lives of men, the conversation started being into bubbles of men, where then men started coming together on, patriarchy has negative implications on men, but that discourse was removed from the feminist analysis of patriarchy and resulted into reinforcing the sense that men are vulnerable, and then there are men's rights that needs to be addressed. And that led to the development of whole men's rights narrative. And we as Meninges really are opposing to that, right? How do we create and be mindful of, for example, we talk with a number of policymakers, majority happens to be men, right? We do talk about men who are in the part of permanent missions, but then we go on to talk with men to talk about, their responsibilities. But those conversations tend to look at who we as men's lives and not really be informed for the feminist interpretation or analysis. So I think those are the pieces that I really want us to think more and more on. How do we put this entry point as good entry points, but also moved into little more looking at the uncomfortable topics, for example, bodily autonomy, challenging gender binary, talking about men's responsibility of whether, we are talking about putting men into kitchen, but we are not talking with the same man the importance of allowing and creating, as Satish was saying, enabling environment for women to be involved in politics. We saw some great work that Breakthrough is being doing, but also the one that Satish you were mentioning in Maharashtra, where the entry point was fatherhood for sure, but it resulted into creating these men supporting women's political participation, for example, or land owning rights as well. So how do we move into challenging these broader uncomfortable pieces around climate? The majority of the climate deniers, they may become good fathers, but they are not supporting and challenging climate crisis we are facing. They are not standing against the authoritarian government and regime and militarization happening. They are not standing against the colonization approach and dominance of authoritarian regimes at the moment. And that is why we need to make sure that this work and some of the resources and one of the finding of that I shared was the review of programs by OHCHR. And that's what some of the pieces have come out. And I would like us to think towards that direction. Thank you.
Tavishi, if you have one or two,
Yeah.
some
Sure. I mean, I think Lakshman, you kind of touched upon this, but I'm a data person. I do a lot of research, and I was reading this really interesting report that came out of sort of doing like a qualitative study with bureaucrats in Pakistan and in India, and they were looking at it and they saw that majority of them don't actually understand histograms, and so often we think we have this kind of oxymoron. We need to have evidence to kind of create policy change. And so Lakshman, the reason why I say you touched upon it is particularly around the space where you're saying you're talking to men, right, about topics that are really uncomfortable, that could be uncomfortable, but at the same time, we often use this kind of complicated, data and figures thinking we are making our point. It is about understanding that not everybody speaks this jargon, not everybody speaks data. They're not trained in the same way. That's not their job. That's not what they've come. That's not the expectation we should have. But we, as scholars, academics, practitioners, researchers, believe that this is the way we see the world, and therefore that's how they should see the world as well. There's a mismatch. And then we sort of struggle because they cannot understand what it is that we're trying to say. And we're like, but the data is right here, the data is right here. And so we need to kind of create shifts in how we also talk and frame, not just kind of what Lakshman was talking about, but also sort of in addition to that, like the evidence that we are sharing has to be done in a way that's complicated and sophisticated. We're talking about human behavior. Nothing about that is simple. It is complex. But how do we do it in a way that actually can then speak to multiple types of audiences? I don't think it's a skill that we in the development sector yet have in a way that can shift the needle as well. So I want to sort of urge us to all kind of do a skill building and the humility to say that we don't have this. This is not something we can do. We cannot communicate these complicated things in a way that feels key takeaways, concrete actions, practicalities, what does that mean? So just from that perspective, I'm like I said, I'm a data person. And one of my big challenges is that how do I translate that in a way that people don't get overwhelmed by how sophisticated and complicated it looks? So that's a quick point, Srinivas, in my end.
Yeah, thank you. And as it is said, it is a lot more difficult to keep it simple, right? Yeah. So I want to come to Satish, and then, yeah, Satish, if you have one or two recommendations that you want to suggest to the whole, yeah.
Yes, sure, Srinivas-ji. And we have to think about all the curriculums and the intersectionality approach. So maybe in India, we can see there is a very gender sensitive person. They are very good men and boys in the family, but at the same time, they think the all problem is due to Muslim. So it is interlinked. So we have to bring the whole things, and in particularly in the India, if you're talking the fidelity, now Supreme Court said that the fidelity is the important part of the Constitution. So it is not only to teach the Constitution and make the practicable guidebook, but also add the and reinforce and the focus on the fidelity issue. The other thing is also where is the men and boys also need the support, counseling support. Where is the counseling support is available for men also? So, and without investing in them, it is not possible to change even the environment around the thing. So I have only 2-3 things that we have to follow when we are going to follow and suggesting to use the ecological model. Certainly we have to create some service support also for men who are going to practice the more gender equitable, non-hegemonic, caring based practice. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you have a couple of.
Yeah, a couple of, I completely agree with Lakshman and what Satish ji just said, this, and two things that, some things are possible in a scale and that will not have the deeper implications that a very deep transformative approach will have. So I will give 2 recommendations. One is in the deep transformation work that we do, one way to stop men feeling really, being singled out as champions is to actually put them in a collective where there are both, women, men, and other genders together as gender champions. And we've done this, and it seemed to have worked. We have about 3,000 of such, we call them team change leaders. And what we see actually when we talk to young people about gender and rights and gender-based violence, the actions that they take are often not on gender. They take actions on community, on family. They change things around, on climate change. They take action on menstrual health. They take action on other kinds of things. So this is the group that we are trying to nudge towards more difficult conversations. What happens when you come a conversation about contraceptions? What happens when we talk about power and when we talk about, right to property? Those are difficult conversations. You can do it with a handful of people. When it really comes to scale, those kind of conversations are very difficult to scale up. So the approach that we have taken at scale is actually to work with the mainstream government education system to actually have a gender lens into that system. What does that mean? Incorporating a gender lens into the middle school and the senior school curriculum, literally looking at 4 or 5 narrative subjects and see where can we bring in, more progressive content. We've done this in Punjab already. We are about to do this in Odisha. There are 2 direct states where we will implement this. Second thing is training teachers and school leaders to build overall gender sensitivity, how to handle bullying in classroom, how to demonstrate more gender equitable behavior in classroom, how to ask more questions that will, push your curiosity, how to handle, intergender, problems and relationships and conversations. And third is that working with the middleman in the education system, the middle management, the education officers, the administrative officers who push the conversations, push the agenda for the teachers. And lastly, to create a a kind of parent-teacher conversations around these kind of issues, around the burden of care work, around sharing those burdens, around, boys and girls being equal. So these are the 4 steps that we are trying out over the next, 5 years with about 66,000 teachers and 56,000 schools, which will hopefully reach about 4 million adolescents. This is a scale, but I am not sure whether those deep transformations will work. But we will actually get everybody to a same starting point, let's say. And I think that is a big kind of a thing. The other things we will continue to try and work with in our deep transformation area. So those are my recommendations to policymakers. Let's begin young. Let's begin in school, because home is not enough.
Absolutely. So very quickly, I want to also give enough time for people to ask questions. So Rachel and Clara, if any of you want to come in and have one very pressing kind of, if you have a recommendation that has till now has not come, if you have something, please to share.
So very quickly, very short, not the list of everything I would like to say, but connected to what has been said before and the important call to action by Lakshman. Definitely when we talk about engaging men, that bringing down the patriarchy cannot go without really having those difficult conversations, necessary conversations. So I would support the need to join this collective effort between public, private, civil society, to both, because we are talking about technology and the online spaces, I think we all need to really strengthen the way we understand how these digital and online spaces where boys and men spend now a lot of their time and interact and are fed and reproduce content, how these work, how to address the challenges and also the opportunities that these present to create a counter movement. And we've talked about how to model other behaviors on and offline, supporting men also to resist harmful masculinities that they see online and beyond, and help them see their own stake in a gender equitable world. Men Engage Alliance put out there a call for action that I think we should all sign if we are aligned with this, to stop misogyny and violent behavior online and challenge gender stereotypes in all of the spaces where this happens.
Thank you. Thank you. Rachel, do you have something to add?
No, just psyched to hear what the 50 people who have made it through an hour and a half have to say.
So I think
Over to them.
I want to stop here. I mean, in terms of our conversation, but I think a couple of questions that have come, I want to kind of put it here. It's came from Baiba Ziga. She asked, how can we empower more men to, number one, actively show up in spaces where such topics are being discussed, and number two, decenter their experience and egos. So then another question, which is specifically for you, Sohini, I mean, it has come from Teresa. Do you use restorative justice? What is that? Okay, it's not very. So to approaches to inform boys and men of these issues that women faces. Restorative justice, I think what they are saying. There are, and if you have, please, these are two questions that have come to me, but please ask, raise your hand and ask questions. We'll be happy to kind of engage. Oh, Haya, yes, please ask.
Yes, my question was about the restorative justice, and that's about getting men and women together to talk about an issue that might have been like an affront or an adversity against a woman. And so are you using restorative justice to address how boys and men are addressing women's issues and girls' issues?
Yeah.
Yes, I have heard of the restorative justice approach, Teresa, and we have a partner in Asia who's actually using that very well. So we've done some work on that, but no, we are as of now, we are not really using the restorative justice approach. Though we do talk about, justice separately. We talk about restorative practices separately, but not a kind of an approach or a definite thing that we follow. Thank you for that question.
Yeah. And the first question that has come on, how do you actively make men actively show up into the spaces and, getting into the difficult conversation and also without ego in spaces which are women exclusive spaces coming in, not bring their ego with them. How do you do that?
Yeah, and so, we've used actually media arts and popular culture a lot, because we find that when you use media or you use popular culture, it breaks the barriers of, using difficult words or having a conversation, which is very, kind of us versus them conversation. So when you use, let's say, theater or a forum theater, which gives you a particular problem to solve, you see a lot of men and boys come into that space to suggest this could be a solution, this could be so then that becomes a very non-threatening space where to engage young boys and men. The other thing that we have seen is that in big gatherings, if you show some media, if you show some public service ads that's kind of targeted towards your behavior, when one person starts speaking up, a lot of other boys and men feel empowered to stand up and talk about it. This has a pattern that we've seen again and again and again. And that is something that we've used So sometimes we also bring in interesting, interesting vehicles like film shows or music that brings everybody together, irrespective of what the conversation is going to be. So you have to be strategically positioning the conversations as something that you can do together. You can participate in this. This is easy for you to participate. And then, you kind of push in those questions in. We used to do a film, we used to do a film festival actually years ago. And that was something that really got us interesting results. But media, entertainment education is a very, very sure way of breaking those barriers and talking about things which are very, very difficult to have conversations.
So any other question from Jyoti that has come to you?
Sorry, Srinivas, can I just quickly just add a little bit more
please,
to that
yeah.
particular question? And then I might actually ask Rachel to step in because she has some really unique ideas. Well, one of the things that Clara had pointed out initially was also that we often try to get, men in their transition periods. So we have noticed particularly with men as they're kind of about to become like expectant fathers. And so we do a lot of this work in the, in the ANC, the antenatal care clinics. And so when the expectation would be that if they would be kind of supporting and accompanying their, the wife, the mother to be, that's a space in when, we can actually kind of engage them, bring them in. So the health sector is actually somewhere where we've had success in many countries, Chile, Rwanda, Brazil, to kind of, use the health sector to kind of, again, access the men, but then in their fatherhood space as expectant fathers, kind of then engage them in contexts and like in content that feels relevant. And then the content is not specifically only around just parenting, right? It's got to do with then kind of gender equal household decision making, etc., parenting, violence, etc. So just sort of, if you're asking sort of how do we then take away their egos, essentially, I mean, you look at the spaces where you think that they would be most amenable to having these conversations. And the reason I wanted to ask Rachel to come in is because I think, Rachel, you had sort of began these questions around like, how do you talk about them in terms of their friendships and conflict and so bringing up topics. So I just might ask you to sort of step in on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks. Certainly, I think it's, the first thing I hope we all do is ask men what they care about and what their values are and who they already talk to about these things to understand their existing behavior. I know in a lot of places it's like, well, we can't ask men to show up for free to these things. We have to pay them. But guess what? Men go to soccer games or football games, they go to music concerts. So how do we think about the other things and people that men care about who are influential in their lives in these particular ways and leverage those? And I think that lacks, Lakshman, it's interesting to hear you talk about systemic change. But in order to create systemic change, you actually need to engage with system actors. And those people might not, or those systems might not be open to being like transformed immediately, right? And so how do you, as you guys are doing with the health system, and I've done in Uganda with an amazing team of theologians and lots of partnerships in Uganda with the Anglican Church, how do you find inroads with people who are deeply influential in people's lives and then start to nudge their beliefs and behaviors and do it in a way that's acceptable? So for example, this program Becoming One that's scaling in Uganda right now with the Anglican Church, we never talk about violence, we never talk about power, but in our randomized control trial, both of those things shifted, in a substantial way. And so it's about, and also to what you were saying, Tadishi, this was positioned as a premarital program, right? Within the church, that was already something that people were paying for as part of a wedding ceremony. So there was actually a business model behind it for the church. It was very sustainable. And it was something that as people, they realized, oh, this feels familiar. I already sort of attend something to learn about how to be in a relationship from this institution. I already trust this norm entrepreneur, my pastor, right? And what we realized is that our collaborators in this program were not just any faith leaders, but were the gender progressive faith leaders. So in our study, they were delivered 4 times the impact. And so what we've done is to not say, hey, we need to engage with the whole system, we need to blow this out to everyone, but to say, hey, can we actually sort of get our targeting right? Right? And this is the same thing you can do through social media to actually target people who are searching for particular things, but to say, let's find the people who are already mostly aligned with our principles, our values, and let's work with them who are already plugged into a system, who already have resources to dedicate to this, and who will already, as faith leaders or the church, benefit from a reduced conflict in their community, right? So it's understanding the principles and the priorities of all those actors, and then being able to adjust and compromise what we may want in order to be beneficial to not just the users, but to all the stakeholders and system actors.
Thank you. Thank you. So Sohini, there is one question to you from Jyoti. Could you please share some of the challenges you faced while executing your program in school, if you can?
Many challenges. The first challenge was that school principals and teachers said, we don't have any gender imbalance in our school. We do not, our girls do not ever face any violence. This is completely, what you're saying is completely. So that was the first kind of a thing. Boys would not open their mouth in the few first sessions. They would just sit in a huddle in one corner. They will just not open up. That was the second one. The third was girls would not, mix with boys and they will sit separately, in 2 corners, because they've been told that it's very bad to actually, mingle with boys and sit there. So there were many problems, and we still have problems coming in as we work every day. But, slowly, seeing the power of transformation, and Satish ji said, the social ecological model, we work with the social ecological model where you transform yourself, then your family, then your community, then institutions. We see that happening, and that it takes time. It's not easy. It cannot be done in a day, but it takes time, but it happens. It's slowly but surely, as you keep pushing the systems, things fall into place. We still have those, those odd principals who come and say, I don't need this in my school. We once had a fight, who almost came to kind of beat me up saying, what are you teaching our children? So, those things continue, but yes.
Yeah. So I think Andrea Wilson has a question for you, Lakshman. On the structural change side, and in light of the regressive attitude post-pandemic, where does you think civil society needs to focus attention first? What structural action should we be pushing for most immediately?
No, so I think one thing to clarify when I was talking about systems or
Oh, we have lost Lakshman's voice. He was traveling.
I think he lost connection.
Yeah. Oh, okay. There is someone also.
Sorry.
Yeah, Lakshman. Yeah.
Yeah. Got disconnected.
Yeah. So.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah. Please.
Yeah. Sure. So I think, thank you for that question. So I think one of the things, so a simple example. So when we talk about systems transformation, it feels like we are talking about overhauling the whole system that revolves around us, right? So one of the very clear example when we talk about us moving towards systems change is a simple example of I as a man. If I think I am supporting or being nice or being, if I'm in a heterosexual relationship, if I am being nice or protective towards my partner, is it because I have a relation with her as I am the husband, which is supposed to be then taking care and protecting my wife? Or am I talking about her human rights as a single human being, not just because she is my partner? Right. So it boils to that level of understanding when we talk about systems change. The fact of the struggle is we are asking for the female or LGBTIQ identified or non-conforming individuals to have the sense that their human rights is maintained fully as human being, not just because they are wives or they are sons or daughters of someone, right? So that is what the systems change means. So Raquel, we didn't mean to talk about, sort of, the religious leaders going about changing and transforming everything. If the religious leaders, the question is, are they, sort of the learning, as I was mentioning earlier, right? Now, yes, we see a number of religious leaders talking about, violence is no more tolerated. But violence is so big. What kind of violence are they talking about? And then whether there is a shift to one level of violence, for example, the intimate partner violence they have started talking about, or violence against children is what they are talking about. But is that broadening and opening for more conversation? And whether they are taking that in their own space. So in terms of systems, we need to look at it from also socio-ecological model. So the immediate institutions that we need to look at is one, definitely the family, but also immediately is that men live multiple lives. It's not that I am just a family member, but I am in a particular institution. So I think when
we lost
will
your
have
voice.
to taken to this. Sorry, this effort needs to be taken forward into multiple institutions that we as men, so that I don't get stuck. Oh, I need to protect my family. I need to be a better husband or father, but I am also a director in an organization. I am an influential person in my university. Am I doing enough, right? Or am I limiting myself to where I feel comfortable, which I feel like where I am getting recognized for, but not in the spaces where I feel being pressured that I will be ridiculed for doing the things that I am doing. So it is that small, which may look small steps, but are very significant steps in different kinds of institutions. So when we say systems transformation, it's not that big system we are only referring at. It has these minute systems that we are talking about, and then that feeds into the bigger system. I hope that helps.
Yeah. So thank you, Lakshman. And I think right now I don't see any questions or any hand. And also, I think we have kind of almost done our time. So I think, so first of all, thank you very much for this engaging conversation and discussion. Three things that stand out very clearly. One is definitely, I mean, given as Lakshman has brought it, and Satish has also said in so many words, is that we need to work with institutions. Number one, whether it is school or family or various other places, institutionalized spaces. I think, as you said, we need to push the envelope further. We can't just be celebrating fewer gains, but I think time has come where we need to ask hard questions and, difficult conversations. We should be feeling much more confident as a civil society to engage in difficult conversations and carrying them in various spaces that we engage with. And I think three, as Sohini has said, and also, I mean, work with young boys, because that's the age where one can look at long-term longitudinal transformation. But also very interestingly, what you have brought about this trade-off between, I think Rachel has also spoken about, Clara has also, trade-off between scale and transformation. I think somewhere we need to also strike the balance where we are able to reach out to men where we need to reach out to, but also looking at some of the transformative processes that is also equally essential in terms of when we look at pushing the boundaries, pushing the envelope. So these are some of the things, and I'm very grateful to this panel for bringing in their thoughts, their experiences, and we certainly need to continue to engage as civil society in collective platforms. And I think a lot of material, a lot of links that have been shared, we will try to collate them and send it to everybody and continue to learn from each other. So thank you very much for coming for this session, and we thoroughly enjoyed it.